Aloha, my name is Ken Lawson, and again I'm your host of Life in the Law. And today we have a pretty exciting show today with two exciting guests. And I didn't know about the issue we're going to talk about is the massacre that happened on Jeju Island back in 1948. I had no idea about this going on until I went to I guess a symposium, a presentation given by law professor Erik Yamamoto and Miyoko, Pettit, scholars advocate student at the University of Hawaii. And let me just give you some of Erik's background real quick, and I'm going to let him share with you this important information. Him and Miyoko share with you this important information about what happened and where we can go to help bring some type of healing to this situation. Professor Yamamoto is an award-winning, internationally recognized law professor at the University of Hawaii, William S. Richardson School of Law. He is known for his legal work and scholarship on racial justice, with an emphasis on redress for historic injustice. He also specializes in civil procedure and complex litigation for his teaching, mentoring, scholarship, and justice work. In April 2012, he was appointed to a prestigious new professorship, the Fred T. Korematsu Professor of Law and Social Justice. It's a high honor. Professor Yamamoto has received 8 outstanding law teaching awards, including the University of Hawaii's highest award, the 2005 Regents Medal for Teaching Excellence, and Society of American Law Teachers Nationwide Award as Outstanding Law Teacher for 2006. In 1984, Professor Yamamoto served as, I cannot pronounce this word, but co-counsel to Fred Korematsu in the successful reopening of the infamous World War II Japanese-American internment case. And here's the point. When I went over your resume, and again, when I saw the presentation put on you and by the scholar advocates at UH Law School, I had never been so moved since I've been at this law school. The work that you've done to bring about healing in all different cultures, like you said, the Japanese internment camp, you worked with African American for reparations, all over the world. You have at least touched in an area where law can be used to help and serve others to bring about healing. Most of the times, law and civil suits are brought to bring division, to see who's right and who's wrong. This says that's not the issue. The issue is where do we go from here? How can we move on together? So, hey, thanks for both of y'all being on the show.
Thank you, Ken. And Professor Lawson, first I wanted to say you've been such a wonderful addition to our law school. And your work on criminal law, criminal justice is more than just about court cases, but it really is about healing the wounds of injustice and how to bring people together. So in many ways, you and I, all of us, do the same kind of work. You know? So it's great to be here with you.
Can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, it blew me away. This whole thing just blew me away, and you almost brought me to tears in the presentation, but can you tell us what?
Sure. You know, there's so many complex moving pieces that I think it would help if Miyoko and I structure our comments in response to your questions around 3 things. And the first is, what happened in Jeju history, the so-called Jeju Grand Massacre in South Korea with U.S. involvement? And second, what's happening now to heal the persisting wounds of this injustice? And then third, what's been the role of our scholar advocate law students and myself, our project, in engaging in social healing grassroots efforts with the people of Jeju? So maybe those are the 3 things we can talk about. And if it helped, I could start with a little bit of history.
Brother, it's your show.
Well, what we're going to talk about today is the stalled or incomplete social healing initiative targeting this peacetime Jeju April 3rd or 4.3 Grand Massacre in South Korea. Starting in 1948, tens of thousands on Jeju Island, which is a lot like Okinawa. It's part of Japan. Jeju Island was part of South Korea.
Okay.
Tens of thousands were killed by the South Korean security forces under the oversight supervision of the United States military. Many more were tortured, including many women who were sexually assaulted. Many disappeared and definitely detained. Thousands of homes destroyed, villages burned. It was incredible. Jumping forward to show how this is relevant today, just 2013 marked the English translation of the South Korean National Investigative Committee's 2003 report on this Jeju massacre. And the English translation was the first time anybody really read about what really happened there. And that translated version of the report was momentous. It really exposed vast new audiences to the horrific peacetime chapter in South Korean history between the two wars, World War II, South Korea. Most stunning, this extensive investigative report revealed the largely unknown substantial role of the United States in the tragedy, responsibility for the carnage then, and responsibility for social healing now. Yet, and this is most significant, the United States has been totally absent from any reconciliation efforts to date. And so that's what is going on right now.
Does the United States deny it, or they just are like, are we just ignoring it, we as a country?
There's two pieces to that.
Okay.
And the first piece is that, yes, the United States has so far almost completely ignored, A, what happened, and B, who was responsible for it. And one former military colonel actually has come out and said, you know, the U.S. was actually actively involved and is responsible. But other than that one person, the answer is no. I think the reason is that the South Korea government, which after the democracy movement initiated this intense investigation, pulled back the reins in calling for U.S. participation even in the investigation. So the U.S. didn't participate. They didn't produce the documents, they didn't produce the witnesses. And so as a result, the conclusion of the report kind of lets the U.S. off the hook, even though the actual body of the report really does point the finger at U.S. participation.
I found that interesting in the presentation you and the law students gave last week, is that all throughout the document, it shows that the United States was involved, oversaw all this, was conscious of it, allowed it to happen, didn't do anything to stop it, but then the report at the end resolves almost any responsibility.
That's right, and so the big question is, why is that?
Yeah.
And to respond to that, maybe I can give you some of the specifics, and the people I think would really find interesting the specifics that the report investigation showed. And Miyoko and I, when we were in South Korea and meeting on Jeju Island with the people and doing our own investigation, and we had one of our Scholar Advocate students in Korean read the documents, and this is what all the documents and investigation showed. That initially, there were protests on Jeju Island about the U.S. military occupation and about the South Korean police being very violent to the people on Jeju. And there were protests about not enough rice and starvation. And so when the protesters came together, the U.S. sent down national police, violence ensued. The people then protested some more. Then the U.S. called them all communists, Island of Reds. And even though the people were not communists, and U.S. intelligence showed that, no more than 500 out of 180,000, nevertheless, calling the people of Jeju Island of Reds unleashed the anti-communist policy of the U.S. and really opened the door to repression. And so what happened after that was that a few of the Jeju people with bamboo spears, literally, and farm implements, said, we're going to stop. We're not going to let you brutalize our people. And then the U.S. and the South Korea police came in full force. And what followed after that was this incredible devastation. 30,000 of the island's residents were killed. Most of them had nothing to do with any resistance, certainly nothing to do with communism, just villagers who were later found massacred.
They were civil rights protesters. They were protesting for
That's
their
right.
civil rights, and then labeled communists in order that they could be, anyway.
They could be held back. And so the women were brutalized, sexually raped. The men were shot and killed. People were detained. Anybody within 500 kilometers of the shoreline was then killed. Entire villages tried to move away. And I'll let Miyoko share her experience in talking, when we talked with the Victim Survivors Association, and kind of her response to hearing the stories of these people.
Don't make me cry again now.
I'll try not to, but it's a very moving story. We were invited to meet, and actually we were invited to give a keynote presentation last October in 2013 by the 4.3 Victims Family Survivor Association. And during our meeting with them, we met with about 12 survivors, and the President Chung Moon-hoon, He recounted to me and shared his Han with me this horrific story. He recounted that when he was 6 years old, his mother was taken away by police. She was raped and returned, but she was never the same. Meanwhile, his father fled out of fear of being shot, which he eventually was. And his grandfather and uncle were bayoneted in the stomach for refusing to tell the authorities about the location of fellow villagers, which they actually knew nothing about. And we say that he was sharing his Han, or he was sharing the trauma with me. And it's very evident through all these different stories. This is just one example of a very common narrative that we encountered from everyone, our taxi cab drivers, some of the scholars we met at Jeju National University, even one of the producers at this national broadcast TV station. They all share the same story, how someone in their family was wrongly presumed to be communist and then either tortured or killed, left to be an orphan. And it's just such a common story that I had never heard of, and was very moving and reaffirmed my commitment to doing this sort of social justice work with Professor Yamamoto.
As a scholar advocate, that just had to be, I mean, when you gave your presentation, the scholar advocates through your program at UH reminded me of why I became an attorney, you know, and to help and to really help others, and to see you and the other scholar advocates become this involved to help other people throughout our world is just commendable.
Well, and myself and Susan Serrano, we started this Scholar Advocate program as a pilot project, and we take just a very small handful of very committed, promising, wonderful law students, usually after the first year, and work with them for 2 years and then out into practice to really help train them in high-level justice theory, how to do justice, but then to learn how to translate that theory into frontline practice, and then more so to engage with real communities in their controversies to see what ways that we can share our knowledge or expertise to really try to help make a difference. And Miyoko has been a really shining star in our scholar advocacy project, and together we've worked on a number of projects. We've authored several articles. We've gone to speak in South Korea here, and we're going to go to Washington, D.C. with the team of scholar advocates and working on a big book on all of this. So.
That is amazing. And it makes me proud to be associated with this law school. It really does. But go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Why don't we come back to that? Because I think I'm going
to
finish answering the question you asked earlier about the U.S. role.
Right.
And so here's what the report showed about the U.S. involvement in this Jeju 4.3 tragedy. It really started in 1948, then went a couple of years. It said the U.S. was involved initially in initiating all of the 4.3 devastation. Then it said after Syngman Rhee became president of the Republic of Korea, August 1948, the U.S. military continued to exercise operational control over the South Korean Military National Police, and the widespread violence then ensued. Cycle of terror. Closely supported by the U.S. military, the Republic declared national law and indefinitely detained many, summarily executed and tried thousands wrongly presumed to be communists or communist supporters, thousands more tortured or killed without evidence of or links to communists or communism or resistance action, and then it was all covered up for decades.
And that, I think that, and like you said, it was just translated into English in 2013, which means someone was consciously trying to keep this a secret. Or at least that's what it seems to me. You know what I mean? Why is it taking all these years to translate it to where we can all read what was going on?
And that's a really important question, and Miyoko and I are American citizens, and there's very intense South Korean politics that involves geopolitics with the United States, and things that we've looked into but we're not privy to all the details.
Okay.
So geopolitics is behind it, and certainly there's been a reluctance in our estimation for the South Korean officials to point the finger at the U.S. because there's a real sense that the U.S. is a protector of security, economic trade. So there's a whole bunch of geopolitical reasons. But there were some scholars early on beginning to point the finger at you. And one of them is George Kastiafikis from the U.S. Wentworth Institute of Technology. This was his finding even before this National Committee report. So Jeju is the single worst massacre that occurred under the post-war U.S. military government, and it is yet to be acknowledged by the United States. And until Americans acknowledge and accept responsibility for the tragic actions of our government, like the massacre at Jeju, many Koreans will regard us with fear and even hostility or suspicion. And so all of these pieces have come together, and it's a question of, well, why only now is the U.S. role beginning to surface and becoming public? And I think that's one of the reasons we were asked to participate and to try to see if we could help provide broader public education on this.
Well, that's what's amazing about your background and what you all are doing with the Scholar Advocates is the social justice or healing through social justice, right? I mean, because what you just pointed out is it helps America to confront its own wrongs. I mean, it's not like, you point fingers and say, okay, you're to blame, and that's it. Your philosophy, what you've been practicing for years, basically, and what you've been teaching the Scholar Advocates is, this does everybody good. This is I'm sorry.
No, that's
I'm just excited.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point, and I'll make one comment and turn it over to Miyoko to talk about what we're trying to do. But I think exactly what you talked about is that the kind of clunky academic term we use is interest convergence. But it's real that what we're trying to do in finding a way to promote social healing is to bring all the different groups, different countries to the table. The U.S., the South Korean government, the Jeju local government, the Jeju Victims Association, human rights people, everybody to the table to see that everyone has an interest in healing the wounds of injustice. That you don't have to run away from it, but rather it's your human rights obligation to repair the damage you have wrought. And if you do, by healing the wounds of the individuals and changing the institution so it won't happen again, really you take these active, proactive steps, then everyone can claim legitimacy according to democratic principles, that everyone benefits. And so what we've done in working with the Jeju people, and really we were asked by the scholars and the victims people and the journalists and the artists to really put together a petition for a joint task force that would bring all these groups together, just kind of structure next steps, what we do next.
Mm-hmm.
And so our group did put that together, and Miyoko can talk about that petition.
So I brought the petition, and I see you also have a copy of it. But this petition really emerges from this ongoing sense that social healing and reconciliation around Jeju 4.3 is, in a way, backsliding, or,
right.
At the very least, it's incomplete, and at the worst, it's regressing. This feeling was so palpable and so present everywhere we went on Jeju that we came back to Hawaii with this kind of call upon us from the Jeju people, as including all the scholars and victims and survivors that Professor Yamamoto just mentioned, to sort of put together a petition with this proposal for a joint task force, so a joint U.S. and South Korea implementation task force. And actually the full title is a joint South Korea and United States Jeju 4.3 Incident or Tragedy Task Force to further implement recommendations and further comprehensive and enduring social healing through justice.
Because some of the stuff certain things had been done, but then it seemed to stall. I think in the presentation you had talked about in 2007, things just kind of like, almost like, we've done enough now, let's get back to business as usual.
Exactly. So coming out of the 2003 Korean report that was published and presented to the public by the 2000 National Committee, there were a bunch of recommendations to the president, to the South Korea government about steps that they could take to further social healing. Some of those included creating a public memorial and gravesite for known victims, a presidential apology, and as well as providing some sort of economic justice for the Jeju people. And the South Korea government did do a few things. There's a beautiful peace park that we visited, as well as this very impressive and moving gravesite for known victims. But in 2007, President Lee was elected, and he was the leader of the Conservative Party, and that's really when they started to wrongly recharacterize the Jeju people of 1948 as communists or communist supporters. And that's sort of when there is a very strong sense that social healing was now stalled or backsliding. And that's sort of where we are today as well, with that same sort of characterization of Jeju people as
and
communists.
that should be something else that's demanded, is that there be a declaration that the majority of the people there were not communists, because that's something that the survivors have to carry, with them as being labeled something that they're not, in order to allow governments and other people to hate them.
And it's even worse than just being labeled that way. In South Korea, there was, and it seems like it sort of should have been abolished, but the remnants of it still exist, a guilt by association system.
Right.
And because you're labeled just by association to someone who might have been wrongly presumed communist, a lot of the relatives and children of the Jeju people very recently and even today were blackballed from university admissions, from government jobs, and just living with that sense of this continued trauma that's being passed on to them is something that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And it's really a double whammy of this continuing trauma that Miyoko talked about. So first, the people were killed and tortured and injured because they were deemed communists even though they weren't. And then later, when they were dead, their families are deemed to be guilty for having come from a having communist relatives. Well, the people weren't communists to begin with.
Right.
And second, these people now have anything to do with the original incident, yet they're being blackballed for it. And so the way that the reconciliation process was set up, it seemed to really benefit mainly the people who were deemed innocent, but anyone who was any way connected with anybody who died was not innocent. So a whole bunch of people who suffered the most were kind of left out of the benefits of the reconciliation process. So in addition, for all the financial harms that people suffered, there's been no economic justice, no reparations individually, no capacity building for the communities, or very little. So the harms remain, all exacerbated by this new naval base that's being built.
You know what? The bottom line, even if a small population, or even if some were communists,
Right.
sticks against gun. I mean, they didn't deserve to get killed like that.
That's
I mean,
That's right.
It's a
Anyway.
major human rights violation.
It's almost like, if the communists were justified in killing you, even though you don't have any weapons that could really do any harm to us. I'm sorry.
No, and our professor, Taeung Baek, who's at the University of Hawaii now, who's from South Korea, is a human rights hero and scholar now. He has written about Jeju in terms of human rights.
Mm-hmm.
And he said what really happened in Jeju was human rights violations, very significant kinds of human rights violations, for which there has been no redress yet. And so part of what we're trying to do with this petition is to really come up with a way to break the stalemate, to move things forward, to get economic redress, to get the proper characterization of the people, to try to really acknowledge the real extent of the harms of the people, to really deal with the environmental damage, the impacts of the new naval base that the government's building, really partly for U.S. usage, all of those pieces to really get this task force together. And so we were very fortunate to be asked to help craft the original version of this petition for this joint U.S.-Korea task force. So we did that as part of our Scholar Advocate project. And I know Mio might be able to share with you folks the goals of this task force, should it come to be.
So before I go into the goals, I just want to give a brief idea of what this petition is calling for and what it envisions. So we've discussed that the U.S. has been a major participant in perpetrating a lot of these atrocities, but has largely and almost entirely been missing from the reconciliation process. So this petition envisions active participation by the U.S., but also mutual engagement by the Jeju people and the South Korea government representatives. And in this way, the task force is just not this idealistic vehicle that we're just completely dreaming up. It's going to be conceptually and practically grounded. But it wouldn't repeat the investigative work of the 2000 National Committee. And that's where we've sort of crafted these 5 main goals that the task force could perhaps follow. And I'm going to read for you.
Sure.
The first one is to build upon the past investigation by the 2000 National Committee. It was completed several years ago without U.S. participation. So it would be important for the task force to update and fill any gaps in that investigative report. The second goal would be to assess the completeness of the National Committee's recommendations, particularly in light of new and updated information and a full assessment of U.S. responsibility. Because as we discussed, the translated report, although in the body of it really points the finger at the U.S., the conclusion uses let's off the hook. And the third goal would be to assess the effectiveness of actions already taken and what more is needed to heal the continuing wounds. The fourth, in light of the first, second, and third goals, is to recommend further concrete next steps for implementing the National Committee's recommendations and to suggest and oversee follow-up steps as part of this larger integrated justice plan to foster genuine social healing, not only for Jeju and the South Korea people, but also to an extent us as U.S. citizens and the U.S. as a whole. And the fifth goal would be to do these things to generate reparative justice in ways that assure government accountability and enhance the democratic legitimacy of South Korea and the U.S. And that's that interest convergence piece where all participants and all actors would have a good reason to participate in this task force. So in light of these 5 goals, the task force mainly would focus on implementing and overseeing recommendations and next steps to further and complete the social healing process.
Right, and as we talked before we went on the air, it's not about just saying, okay, we were wrong and we're sorry. It's we were wrong, what can we do to make it right? And then it's not until the victims can actually start forgiving the people that taught. I mean, because that's the whole thing about reparative justice is it helps everybody heal.
That's right.
There can be no healing if the tormentor has not admitted and tried to correct the wrongs that's been done.
And I think that's exactly right. We got to have you engage with us more in all of this stuff, brother. It's true because, so often you hear, "Oh, just get over it," or "We'll say we're sorry," and then that's the end of it. That's not the end of it, because it really takes engagement by both sides in giving something, and it requires concrete steps to follow up on the words to really change things, so that people know that each side is really trying to heal the wounds.
Right.
So we call it social healing through justice, not just social healing through words, but by justice, by taking justice actions. In some ways, this petition might sound like idealism, kind of like Pollyanna, but it's really not. It really is very pragmatic, even as it's tinged with hope. So it's strategic, and it's one piece at a time, incremental. It's based on our sense of geopolitics. It's working with the various groups, both in South Jeju, then in Seoul, in Hawaii, then continental U.S., going to Washington, D.C., getting human rights groups involved. And it's turned out that this petition, which our draft at the response of the Jeju people, we did it in English, they liked it and translated it into Korean, and it became part of their next strategic move, the whole strategic petition signing campaign, which is going on right now in South Korea. And so it's pretty amazing that it's the work of a lot of people and organizations, but it's also the work of our scholar advocates.
Yeah.
And so it's Miyoko Pettit, but also our current scholar advocates, which is Catherine Vessels and Nathan Shimodoy and Vehi Ahu and Ampero Banaclocha, and recent scholar advocates and Sarah Lee and Sarah Sheffield, Randall Watt, this whole team of people. We work very intensely together, super intensely together, and sweat blood and tears and laugh and have fun, but it's really how to operate at the highest level, but then to do it in a way where it really produces some kind of results for others.
And I think that the beautiful thing about watching you and the scholar advocates is that you take the law, and it's not what can the law do for me, it's how can I use the law to help others? How can I use the law, what we're learning in law school, to be of benefit to other people so that there can be some healing next? And I think that that's the most unselfish thing that I've seen in a long time, and you all should be commended.
Well, it's a very unique experience. I don't think it exists anywhere else in the nation. Professor Yamamoto envisioned and created and has been running this now for over 10 years. It's been such a success and so worthwhile, and has made my law school experience so meaningful that the students at Berkeley have asked for it, and now they sort of have a similar type of scholar advocacy program.
I mean, because you spent your career giving. You spent your career from your 3-page bio giving. and helping others. And you're passing that along to students. And, you know, having light, we pass it on to others. And that's just a testament that California, Berkeley now want. You know, I think it's going to spread throughout the nation, hopefully globally, because this is a new area, not a new area, but it's an area of law that works.
Yeah. And what's really exciting about it, and thank you for your perceptions and sharing your insights, and it's really helpful to us to hear that while we do try to give and try to contribute, we also realize we get so much back.
Yeah.
Not only do we learn and we sharpen our skills and we really have to apply ourselves, but also that sense of while you're helping yourself, you're really helping others.
Yeah.
That's the best feeling of all. You know?
Yeah.
And it gives you a sense of meaning in what you do, you know.
Yeah.
And Miyoko's been just a wonderful person to work with, and I think, you know, she has all of those wonderful qualities to begin with, as do the scholar advocates we've worked with in multiple generations. But, you know, she, because of that work, the Special Tribunal in Lebanon, which is doing sort of human rights trial this summer, really picked up on her, and maybe you can explain what you did.
Yeah, sure. So the Scholar Advocacy Program not only trained me really well to figure out how do I take cutting-edge justice theory and translate it to frontline practice, but it really helped me to hone in and sharpen my writing, legal analysis, and just all these different skills that you need as a lawyer and even citizen of this world. And in many ways, it's helped me. It's opened incredible doors this past year. I received an offer to be a legal intern at the trial chamber for the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. It's the first court of international character. It's not a UN court, but it's prosecuting for the crime of terrorism.
Awesome.
So its main case right now, the trial just started at the beginning of the year, is right now in the midst of prosecuting 5 accused defendants who carried out or allegedly carried out the attack, the bombing attack on the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri, that not only killed him but killed 23 others and injured hundreds more, as well as completely destroyed downtown Beirut in Lebanon. So this past summer I was in The Hague working with incredible high-level people, and it's also opened up opportunities for me in Hawaii here as well. I'll be clerking at the Supreme Court next year for Justice Pollock and working with him now. And no doubt the training I've had has opened these opportunities, but also in my work in these new opportunities has helped me to rise to the level that's expected.
And we're going to close out the show, but you know, I just listening to the two of you talking, when I came to the presentation, it's obvious that you care. And that's something that we can't teach a lot of students, you know, but to have students that care. And that caring is contagious. And when people see you care so much about an issue, you become attractive. They want you to help them. And I think that you have developed a program that has allowed students to come in and care about what we do. And that caring, like I said, is contagious. And you'll see it go from California, Berkeley, all the way, you know, because it works. It's real. It's not fake. It's real, you know. I'm proud to be associated. I'm glad you guys came on the show, too.
Thank you
for asking us.
Hey, all right.
And we're going to do work together.
Yeah.
For sure. Again, that's our show for this week. I'm Ken Lawson, the host of Life in the Law. And next week, as I say each week, I have absolutely no idea what we're going to talk about, but you're going to have a stone cold gas. You know, that's what Don Cornelius used to say on, at the end of Soul Train. Peace, love, and soul. All right, we're out.